Welcome back to Parallel Barking.
Woof, woof, woof.
Bark, bark. I'm Ariana, and you heard my dad barking.
Or maybe I should go howling today,
Yeah.
considering what we're going to be talking about. Howl.
Yeah, I've been screeching a little bit.
Or, depending on my political leading, bwahahaha.
That's a
It's
little
quite
cruel.
divisive. Yeah, today's divisive day.
It is quite divisive. If you've been listening or are up on it at all.
Oh, you'd have to be dead or disconnected not to have heard.
Perhaps. The Supreme Court could be set to overturn Roe versus Wade, according to a draft opinion that was leaked on Monday night. It was a draft opinion by Chief Justice.
Published and sent to Politico.
Politico,
very
yes.
interesting. It was a very interesting choice. And it shows you how the times have changed. Back during the Vietnam War, when Daniel Ellsberg, I think his name was, wanted to leak the Pentagon Papers, he went to the traditional mouthpieces of the press. I think it was the New York Times or the Washington Post. I think it was the New York Times in that case. Now, when you have a monumental leak like this, it isn't going to the New York Times, or we don't know if it did or not, but it was published by Politico. And that itself is worth analyzing, but not today. But it was brought out by two reporters in Politico, who apparently the news organ spent a lot of time making sure that, satisfying themselves that this was authentic before they went public with it. And then they might as well have thrown a bomb in the middle of Times Square during New Year's Eve.
And they did. Yes, it was a bomb. And it was confirmed today that the draft is actually authentic. Chief Justice John Roberts called the leak actually an egregious breach of the court.
Well, and it was. I mean, the Supreme Court has played footsie with the press in like semi-leaks, and but this is given the history of the court, this is an extraordinary one, especially given the context. But yeah, they're all upset. We'll talk about that as well, but okay. Let's not get distracted for the moment. It is an extraordinary moment in, just a half dozen or so possible ways.
Right. It's, I would say the draft opinion is an unflinching rebuke of the 1973 decision. It basically decided it states and declares that it should have never been made. It wasn't.
So it's like an abortion. So in a way, the Dobbs case is itself an abortion, which could now be made illegal.
Well, Roe versus Wade, basically.
Yeah, no, there's an irony here as well, because effectively what this justice and his four compatriots did was abort a case.
That's so funny. Yeah, because Alito actually writes, Roe was egregiously wrong from the start.
But if we believe in life, having given it life, right? This is the stare decisis. This is the stare decisis part that we will talk about in a bit. The ironies, the paradoxes, the inconsistencies are just as enormous, and that's actually what makes this opinion as an opinion, assuming it will ultimately find its way into some kind of final form with that majority of 5 holding. This one will likely be dissected as much as the one that it claimed, the two that it claimed to overturn, the Casey case and the Roe case. And I wouldn't be surprised if in much less than 50 years, we will have another Alito, an Alito mini-me, writing something along the lines that Mr. Alito or Justice Alito has written here with respect to the cluelessness of the opinion. And that's actually the most interesting part of this, because that is, for me, that's the door that this court has now opened, effectively suggesting that, yeah, well, we're doing something monumental. I can't get off the stare decisis thing, right? Now, well, we're doing something monumental, effectively, and this is, I think, part 3 of this draft opinion. What he says effectively is this: hey, folks, we interpret the Constitution, but our interpretation of the Constitution is technically not worth the paper it is written on, because our object is to get the right answer, which is itself unbelievably problematic. And in a very, very, very bad misunderstanding of the nature and role of the judge, especially over the course of 800 years of the development of common law and then common law and the higher law of the Constitution. I have no idea, but I do have an idea where the perversions that gave rise to that viewpoint began with and he is, this is the funniest thing, he is probably one of the most shining examples of liberal progressive judicial thinking that there is, now deployed, of course, in the service of this conservative political or traditionalist political view, as he understands it, because it's not clear it's either conservative or traditionalist, except in his mind and in the mind of the 4 others. But what he effectively says is, look, we can say whatever we say now, but when we're dealing with constitutional law, because we are trying to find the right answer, then whatever we say today, if another group of 5 people tomorrow think that it's the wrong answer, well, they don't have to worry about what we said yesterday, because they're in the search for the right answer, can just ignore or overturn what we did. This is an ancient thing. Oddly enough, about 20 years ago, I wrote this short essay on what I viewed at the time as this perverse 100-year trajectory of judges, and I, in part the fault of the love affair in the 19th century with German progressivism, and then the pseudo-scientific progressivism and liberalism, not liberalism, realism, sorry, of the American elite, the American judicial elite in the 20th century. But this bizarre notion, at least in my mind, that in fact there is a perfect and forever right answer to a legal question, and that their role is the search for perfection. You know who else thinks this way? Chinese Marxist Leninists.
Oh no!
So they're actually cousins that are separated at birth.
How dare you?
But in a sense, I mean, that's essentially what they're saying. So
my question is, how does this relate to precedent then? So then what is the point of precedent?
There isn't in terms and I think
the precedent matters when it's convenient to you.
No. That's the naughty, cynical way of looking.
Okay, sorry, my bad. Not sorry.
Precedent only matters if the decision is right, understood as a theologically, eternally, and fundamentally correct, true, and only answer for eternity. If in fact it is not, then the court, acting as the magisterium of the American Republic, into whose bodies will pour the soul, the Holy Spirit of the genius of our Republic, only when that actually occurs in the correct way, instead of getting the spirit of Satan.
You're right.
Then and only then will the decision have a long-lasting quality. In the absence of that, this decision will be worth, actually, and after this decision will be worth less than the decision in Roe itself, which is one of the perversities of the decision. Now, they go on ad nauseum about how they build in all of these prudential factors, that they're not going to overturn decisions lightly, but all of that is just sugarcoating around the kernel of the reality that they mean to construct, which is that you cannot take the court at its word unless their word is a step, not a step closer to perfection, because that doesn't solve it either, unless their word is perfection, that is, they've gotten to the right answer, and that therefore you can't trust. And in a sense, I mentioned this before we started talking, and I kept saying that probably the least interesting part of this decision is the substantive decision overturning Roe versus Wade and constitutionalizing the right of a woman to control her own body. And we can talk about that in a minute, which I deeply regret, and I'm being judicious in the way I'm phrasing it. But ironically enough, that's the least amount of damage that this opinion creates. In a sense, the biggest damage that it does is to substantially take a wrecking ball to an almost 200-year project of developing the court as an institution for the production of authentic and legitimate expressions of constitutional interpretations.
Thank you.
Which are stable.
I was so confused.
And predictable.
Because
right?
It really sounded like he was subverting the institution that he is representing. And everything that came before.
Yes. One can take the position that he's subverting. I would take the position that it's not an undermining, but a recasting of the institution as something far, far less legitimating.
So then what's the purpose then now? What are you there for?
The purpose is what it might have been 300 years ago. The purpose is essentially to decide cases with respect to which the decision is law, but at its most narrow, law that applies only to the litigants and only in the context of the case, and that which may or may not have persuasive authority with respect to everyone else. Now, the other consequence, if in fact this is what we've done with stare decisis, we have, and without really saying very much about this, the court has embraced a position which had been mocked by everyone a generation ago, a position taken by Ronald Reagan and his Attorney General, Ed Meese, in a very famous law review article in Tulane in the 1980s, that said, look, the Supreme Court is not the sole arbiter of constitutional interpretation, but the Constitution itself vests interpretation in each of the political branches itself, and that each of the branches has a duty to interpret and apply the Constitution, some of the decisions of which might in specific cases be tested before the court, but that doesn't remove from the political branches the right to interpret the Constitution and to apply that interpretation broadly within the scope of their mandate. So he's done this as well. So again, it's a bull in a china shop. There's not much left of the china shop after he gets done. If people are, and there are very many clever people in this country, if people are very clever and they begin to read, assuming that much of this remains in all these caveats, right? That much of this remains in the opinion, right? At the end of this, I'm going to say, well, this is fabulous. As a lawyer, that means I really don't have to take this seriously. And if I am trying cases before inferior courts, I can say, well, look, yeah, the Supreme Court said this, but they said this in that case. our fact situation is somewhat different. And the court itself said that you can't take it very seriously if, in fact, you can argue convincingly that given the facts in our case, they are wrong, or the case cannot be applied to it, right? And so you're going to see a lot of this stuff. And now they're going to either have to figure out how to rebuild precedent, or not.
This is what I'm saying. It just seems like it's going to be really, really fractured. If that's what he was shooting for, then
yeah, but look, there are two bombs here that are overlooked in the mindless mass emotional appeal hysteria that passes for the modern press and its political parties, most of whom are operating at the level of Freud's id, basically the reptilian mind, and they're not thinking. But if you think about it, there's actually two really interesting things that if I were of a mind, I would exploit, and exploit significantly.
Oh, let's hear it.
Number one, in a sense, you can take this opinion as not an opinion about women's bodies primarily, but as an opinion about federalism. That is, suggesting that it was without the power of the court to impose through the constitutionalization of a moral issue, right, a uniform interpretation at the federal level, right, unless there's a federal constitutional amendment one way or another. That'll be the third thing, and that's all. That can go either way. So that's something that both sides should be very wary of. So it goes back to the states. Well, if it goes back to the states, right, what you're thinking about is, well, it's clear that there are about 26 states that are going to try to effectively go back to pre-1973, and they're going to be all over the board. Some of them are going to say you can't have an abortion under any circumstances, even if you were raped by your father, right? Others will make all kinds of exceptions, and then people basically will go back to pre-1973, where women, and usually it's women with money or women who are supported by NGOs, could game the system. Mm-hmm. But there'll be another 20-something states that will provide some varying degrees. Now, at that point, two things will happen. If people are smart, they will make sure that states create very vibrant precedent setting, because they're not bound by the Supreme Court's blatherings about the nature of constitutional precedent within the state system, because the court has just gotten through saying that, oh yeah, we don't interfere with that stuff. They can go ahead and create very robust state constitutional protections, and you know who these states are going to be.
Oh yes, yes, right? They're already building them.
But number two, because we do have a national system of commerce and societal and political interaction. At this point, it is time for all of the NGOs, businesses, and the like to begin to develop private sector robust pathways to help any woman in any place in this country to quickly obtain a remedy for, or a vindication of her rights over her body, wherever that may be possible to attain. Create basically freedom trails, freedom buses, not freedom, autonomy buses, autonomy, and right. So, NGOs, for example, but also businesses and other social groups should be beginning to do those two things. One, make sure that the protection of a robust right is embedded within the constitutional traditions of states, and that is possible, certainly in at least 20 states, I think. And then to develop the economic and logistical support system through grants, through fundraising, through charitable endeavors of the like, to ensure that this can happen. Yes, it's much less convenient, but that inconvenience may also then fuel the kind of political action that people need. This is, after all, a democratic republic whose politics are fueled by love, but also fueled by anger, right? And fueled by frustration, and then see what happens. So in a sense, this notion that this sense that, okay, we're taking this as a federalism decision, it's going back to the states, actually presents an opportunity, but of a very kind. Yes, it was really nice to have a uniform federal system, although it was weird and everyone was, and no one was really happy with it, but there was some continuity, and we sort of at least kind of knew where the rules were, and that was very nice. But in the absence of that, the point is not all is lost, and there are some opportunities, and to the extent that it also creates more potent and muscular societal organs that can then more robustly in the aggregate participate and project themselves into political discourse, popular sovereignty, especially among those voices that feel strongly about this, will be preserved and perhaps enhanced. Right. Now, the really funny part, and I'm sorry to be going on so long about this, but this is a funny part. In a sense, if you read this correctly, the traditionalist majority may well have backed themselves into a very funny corner. And here's the funny corner. So they say, yeah, we can't do this nationally. You can't read this stuff into the 14th Amendment. It's all got to go into the states. From the other side of their mouth, and over the last 20 years, they've been saying, but the free exercise clause of the American Constitution requires effectively requires the court to recognize the triumphant authority of the right of people to exercise religion, even as against otherwise state activities, unless the state can be put to a very high level of proof that there is no other way to deal with this, right? So free exercise clause has gotten bigger, and a principle of robust neutrality has been being developed over the past 20 years or so. And that this notion of religion is not just organized religion, but it can be an individualized religion as well. I might be tempted, if I were a religious person or as part of a dynamic religious community, to begin thinking about what the divinity and my own personal relationship with God has to say about my autonomy, God's gift to me. So if I'm a religious person, for example, it may be possible that God, having read this opinion, will come down and in the form of a communication or an ecstatic experience, or however it is that the divinity will communicate to an individual adherent or to the community of believers and say, look, I, and by I mean we, it, I don't know how one addresses that which is, I am that I am. And maybe I'll use that from the Old Testament. I am that I am has now, through whatever means of communication, has now infused the body of the community of believers with this fundamental and baseline notion that the greatest and reflection of godliness is in the autonomy of women, and that women must have the right in the exercise of their faith to exercise that authority over their bodies in every kind of way, one of which, but not all of which, one of which involves the right to terminate a pregnancy. Now, if a state interferes with that right, is the state interfering with my religious liberty,
right?
My free exercise of religion, and my ability to live my faith? Can they make an argument that they can do it? The answer is, and here's why I started with the federalism thing first. The answer is a state would be hard pressed to argue that in fact it is absolutely necessary, since the state down the road says it isn't. And in fact, by providing abortion services or termination of pregnancy services, I'd rather use that. The traditionalists have now done bad things with the word abortion. So let's talk about termination of pregnancy.
Mhm.
I can argue, hey, it's it's going to be much harder to show that Mississippi has some unique and extraordinarily contextualized interest that somehow is so unique to it that the fact that New York, California, Pennsylvania allows this cannot enter into the picture, right?
Right.
And so we've got a religious liberty issue, which is a conservative traditionalist construct. We've got a federalism angle, which is a traditionalist conservative construct, both of which were used to knock over this fetish thing that
Yes, and
was
they can
Roe versus
also be
Wade.
used. You're right.
Right. So in one sense, the opinion may, now I'm just conjecturing, the opinion may itself contain the seeds of its own
Demise.
self-mockery. Yeah, right. And we've now looked at it in three different ways that it may have planted the seeds of its own demise. One, by essentially kicking the value of stare decisis, or precedent, the importance of precedent away.
Mhm.
Two, by the inherent notion of federalism and the rights of the American people through the full faith and credit to partake of their fundamental rights and liberty wherever they are,
Mhm.
including by arranging for bus transportation from Mississippi to New York.
Yeah, exactly. To do
right?
whatever the hell they want.
And that is not for Mississippi to decide. That is a gross perversion, a kind of Russian or Soviet Marxist-Leninist totalitarian.
You gonna follow them?
Control, right, on women. And you hear the traditionalists are going to have to fish or cut bait on who it is that they are, or expose themselves.
Right.
With respect to this, right? So
This is a good test, I guess.
You've got the federalism thing, and of course, you've got the free exercise thing. So if people were smart, there are ways of dealing with it. Now, having said that, right, what the decision does tend to do is that it does tend to aid those communities of believers and non-believers who believe strongly that there is a moral position with respect to fetuses in gestation, and that there ought to be some protection. And in that context, I have a lot of sympathy for that as well. At some point, one has a human person that one has to worry about as well. But of course, that has been always the problem with the Roe case and the Casey case, is what happens when you have a female who is now not just her, but her and a baby.
Someone else.
Right. And someone else. Right. I have no answer. And to some extent, that moral question has to be discussed and rediscussed and rediscussed. And I suspect over the course of centuries, we'll go back and forth. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the real question is that discussion must be laid over, right, rather than through the body of the woman herself. And that's sort of something that people lose sight of. And in a sense, not just the body of the woman herself, but the body of the woman in communion with the man with whom the conception occurred.
Absolutely.
Right. And males have gotten short shrift in all of this too. Right.
Point. I mean, it's almost like a separation of mind and body and everything. Like
right. This horrible fetish that Western society has of this categorization. So it's a woman in one category, the human person that she may be carrying, or the fetus, or the cells, depending on the stage, is another category.
For some reason, it's separate.
Right. And then the man, right,
is also separate.
It is separate, right? And that has just created, I think, ultimately more trouble than it's solved. We have spent so much time separating and categorizing that we've lost sight of the fundamental, the fundamental and critical need for solidarity. And that is a marker not just of this case, but of the fracturing and quite distasteful state of our politics, our institutional lives, our social lives, and the like. Solidarity seems to no longer be in fashion. Control is in fashion. Control outside of an autonomous human person is really in fashion. The infantilization of the individual seems to be very much in fashion, so that an individual loses capacity, which is then transferred to an administrative organ, to the state of some kind, to someone else.
Okay, I'm going to cut you off. We are going to continue this tomorrow. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will see you for part 2.